Welcome to Cornish Talks Common Sense. We're here for another new program today. This program is one that I hope is somewhat creative and original. It's certainly a topic we really haven't delved into at length before. I hope it's a topic that has some interest for you because I think it has a lot of bearing on what is happening in the world today and why. And that topic is the subject of psychiatry and how psychiatry has impacted our world and how mental disorders and our welfare and health mentally has been doing in our recent time. Let's come back and talk about that in just a minute. Welcome back. As I just mentioned to you, I want to talk in our program today about mental health and about the field of psychiatry and how those have both impacted on our world in a growing trend in the recent years. So let me start you off by perhaps shocking you with something that I'm going to predict you have never heard before. And so what I'm going to tell you is, would you believe me if I said to you that trauma, traumatic memory, and the whole idea of post-traumatic stress never existed before the early part of the 1900s? I'm going to suggest to you today that that is actually a fairly well-established fact. Let me take you to a book that I found some time ago, which I found to be just fascinating. It's a book called The Harmony of Illusions. The subtitle is Inventing Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And it's by a McGill professor, I believe, Alan Young. And basically what he did in this book is he undertook a study of how post-traumatic stress came into vogue, how effectively it was invented. So let me put this to you. Before World War I, post-traumatic stress effectively did not exist. And it's hard for us to understand that because as time moves on and each generation gets stuck in a certain zeitgeist, a certain belief system that changes intergenerationally, something I've called intergenerational paradigm shift, which is that, as each successive generation continues on, our attitudes and our motivations and our behaviors change. They're adapted as behaviors and memes, if you want a quote from Richard Dawkins, as memes change. This idea of how ideas and trends and fads adapt or are adopted by generations and change as generations move forward. So why is this an important topic? Well, before World War I, effectively people didn't know what it was to suffer from post-traumatic stress. They didn't know it because they weren't told by psychiatrists and counselors and so on that it existed. And this is explained to them as what ails them or how their thinking has been impacted, how their emotional well-being and their feelings have been impacted. And you'll recall, one of my themes I've talked to you about before in the old programming that I've done is that the elevation of feelings has become a significant trend in our current generation. And that coupled with the idea of postmodernism, that they're no longer longer is any truth, only just subjective values of whatever feels right for you, thanks to Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault and other philosophers of that kind. Our thinking processes have become different. They've become what I would suggest to you is disordered thinking. So before World War I, persons that were involved in stressful experiences in life, war, and so on, they just simply dealt with it stoically, right? If I can put it in the vernacular, they kind of sucked it up, and it was what it was. But that's not what our present generation has been told and what has been unfolding since at least the 1960s, where we have begun to live by our feelings. And so our feelings tell us we feel badly, or our feelings tell us that we're sad or we're depressed. And we look for blame, we look for issues that have occurred in our lives that have created trauma. And I'm not here to tell you that there haven't been horrific things that occur in people's lives that can generate trauma. But what I am telling you is how we handle that and how we process it and how we deal with it has become governed now by psychiatric structures and by medication. The pharmaceutical industry, multi-billion-dollar industry annually, that generates drugs to deal with depression, Zoloft and Xanax and all those drugs that are prescribed to tens of millions of people to control their negative feelings about themselves in many cases. And so medication, which has devolved substantially from the psychiatric field, and the diagnoses that have occurred in the DSM manuals, DSM 3 and 4 and moving on to 5, are manuals that have prescribed new psychiatric mental health disorders that are attributed to us. And so these kind of diagnoses have dramatically changed over the decades. And as I said, it was not till the early part of the 1900s, right very close in proximity to the same time when Alan Young would say that post-traumatic stress was invented, that the psychiatric diagnoses began to unfold in the diagnostic manuals that psychiatrists use. And so we've seen the psychiatric industry generate new types of disorders. And let me give you some examples concretely where this can be brought home. So I have some stories with me today that present some shocking information. They talk about that about 25% of the world population will experience a mental health disorder at some period of their lives. 25%. And a great part of those is depression. And just even with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing how that has come to be expressed in our society. As people have begun to live a more fragmented, isolated lifestyle that was generated by COVID lockdowns and so on, we've seen a number of things unfold. So for example, I have one story from the Christian Post that says that 10% of high school students attempted suicide in 2021, and more than half of girls, high school age, feel sad and hopeless. And then another article from the Washington Post that I just got just this week, I think, that talked about, and not only is it girls that have borne the brunt of this, but boys as well have been entering into what they call a major mental health crisis, where suicides are increasing for teens, and other psychiatric ailments that are unfolding as well. And I'm going to suggest to you that one of those is this whole idea of gender dysphoria and transgenderism, a subject that I have talked to you about at some length before. And there are numerous studies that talk about how that the implications of certain social phenomena, and some of them increased by the COVID pandemic, have increased problems with mental health and suicide. One study I have with me today called Morbidity and Mortality Report from 2022 says this in its abstract. It says that disruptions and consequences relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, including school closures, social isolation, family economic hardship, family loss or illness, and reduced access to health care, raise concerns about the effects of mental health and well-being of youths. And it goes on and talks about all of those issues that have unfolded, particularly in recent times, associated with mental health consequences that have been occurring. And then I've said to you that also there have been linkages to gender dysphoria that are related to comorbidities of depression and other health ailments that have arisen in conjunction with gender dysphoria. And so gender dysphoria, I would suggest to you, is every day being more amply documented as simply being a symptom of other underlying mental health disorders that are occurring in the lives of those people who are experiencing gender dysphoria. And I will say this to you, as I've talked about in the past programs, about this social contagion of gender dysphoria. How else can it be explained? Back in the 70s and since that time, the same sex issue began to unfold publicly in a significant way. And so many psychiatrists and doctors, and I would include among those people like Dean Hamer and Simon LeVay, who undertook studies to suggest that homosexuality was something that you were born with, that they were born that way. And I would suggest to you that really was propaganda they put out. Their studies have been substantially discredited. And what they were attempting to say is, look, you can't blame this behavior on us because we're born that way. And of course, there's been a lot of controversy and contention over that ever since. But I would suggest to you that the evidence of it being generated genetically has significantly diminished. And the idea of it being a behavior that has links to some epigenetic features, but is substantially borne out by lifestyle issues is becoming far more persuasive. And it really makes common sense, because if we understand how the underlying ideology that's generated the support for same-sex behavior has worked very hard to construe that as, instead of a behavior, as an identity. So now it's taken on the mantle of being an identity, a type of person, a category of humanity, as opposed to simply a manifestation of human behavior. And that has shaped the agenda, and I would submit to you, in a very distorted manner, of how it's perceived today. So let's contrast that to now this new idea of gender dysphoria and transgenderism. So I have some statistics with me today that talk about a record number of people identifying as LGBTQ and a significant number of people now increasing in transgenderism orientation. So let me give you a few of these statistics. So a Gallup survey from 2022 has now said that 7.2% of American adults identify as LGBTQ. And that's almost doubled over the course of about a decade. And so from 2012, for example, when 3.5% of American adults considered themselves LGBTQ, and now in 2021, 7.1, a doubling. How could that occur? Well, we know it couldn't have occurred from genetic, birth, considerations born with that identity, because that obviously would be impossible to occur by genetic explanation. The only explanation that can account for that is the social contagion, that people have picked it up as behavior, as a social contagion. That's the only plausible explanation that can explain that level of increase. So now, and let me make this point even more clear in light of the intergenerational paradigm shift argument that I made to you just a few moments ago. So right now, Generation Z, those born from 1997 to 2004, now identify almost 20% as LGBTQ. Millennials born from 1981 to 1996 are 11.2. And Generation X, only 3.3%. And going back even beyond that, baby boomers 2.7 consider themselves to be LGBTQ. So how can this doubling of people identifying with that so-called identity, how could that possibly be explained other than by social contagion? Certainly not by genetic birth factors. That could never plausibly explain this. So the evidence of social contagion explaining this is overwhelming. And again, so where does that come from? Well, I would submit to you that there's been a great movement psychiatrically to normalize sexual behavior in ways that previously would be considered abnormal or even perverse. And so this is largely a psychiatric phenomenon. And so if you look at the literature on it over gender dysphoria, they will verify this, that studies are showing clearly, and I would submit unequivocally, that gender dysphoria is growing at the proportions I've just indicated to you because it is a socialized phenomena, a social contagion that is growing among peer groups, among generational groups, based on the influences that are exerted on them in media, in the entertainment industry, and other manifestations that have created this kind of thinking that is growing and developing into the kind of gender dysphoria that we see today, and not in any prior generation, in no prior generation. And again, to harken back to some of my prior programming and biblical views on that, you'll see in Romans chapter 1 and other locations where it talks about people changing their sexual proclivities and changing the way they view their bodies and the way they use their bodies. Something that the Bible speaks to from thousands of years ago, and yet only now do we see it unfolding in the present generation. In ways that has never occurred before. So the psychiatric handling and management of this kind of thinking, this kind of perception of behavior has unfolded only as psychiatry has become to grow in prominence and to be embellished in our modern world as to its significance in diagnosing conditions of mental health and of behavior. So psychiatry has a lot to do with notions that range from post-traumatic stress disorder to how we consider mental health, bipolarism and depression and schizophrenia, and all of these criteria found in the DSM manuals as to what is considered to be normal behavior, what is considered to be cognitive and behavioral thinking, has been disturbed and distorted by psychiatric propagandists, and has been taken on by the entertainment field and in movies, and where we see the promotion of this kind of behavior in ways that is distorting our behavior today. So this is something that we need to open our eyes to and be alert to why this is happening. There is a reason. This is not happening for no reason in our society today. So I hope you get an understanding of that that's greater than what you did coming into this program. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again.